Hi everyone, I'm Tara Lon. Welcome to Time Out with Tinseltown Mom. I'm here today with Danny Jordan, a television producer and director who's worked on a myriad of shows such as Extreme Makeover Home Edition, Biggest Loser, MasterChef, Deal or No Deal, plus many more. After his daughter was diagnosed with an upper limb difference, he authored The Capables, a book series that puts children like his daughter in the hero role to encourage readers to be more inclusive and understanding when it comes to disabilities. Ray's First Day is the debut book in the series, and it was released earlier this year. Today, Danny's going to talk about his family's journey while encouraging other parents, whether disability affects their lives or not. Hi, Danny. Welcome.
Hey, Tara, thank you so much for having me. It's great to meet you.
Well, it's great to meet you as well. And I know I just gave a little snippet of your bio, but there's so many facets about you. You've done so much. Can you just tell us a little bit more about you and your family dynamic?
Yeah, of course. I'd be glad to. So, I'm born and raised here in Southern California, which I know I'm sort of a rare breed, when it comes to people who work in and around the entertainment industry. I was born, like I said, here and grew up. I left for a little while. I went out to New York for a couple of years and worked out there for a little while, but, found my way back here to California. I always tell people that California is where my heart is, but New York is where my soul is, but sort of in this chapter of my life, with being a dad and a husband and, my parents live 7 minutes away, I'm sort of following that heart end of who I am, as it were. But yeah, I grew up around the entertainment industry. I played baseball growing up. Like that was my love in life. That's what I wanted to do for my career. But then, when I was late teens, 18, 19 years old, I auditioned for this show called Pop Stars, which was on the WB. And it was sort of like the show Making the Band, which had been on the ABC, where they formed the boy band O-Town. But the WB did their own take on it. And so the second season, they were forming a guy-girl group. And I drove down to Hollywood and camped out across the street from this hotel for maybe 10 hours and just waited and waited. And I went in and auditioned for the show and, did pretty well. And through that, I ended up getting put into a boy band when I was in my late teens. And so I stopped playing baseball. Yeah, I mean, we weren't in sync, we weren't Backstreet Boys, but yeah. We came in sort of at the end of the boy band movement, and it was cool. We performed at some sorority houses out in Illinois, and we wrote some of our own songs. And some of those guys, well, one guy of those guys specifically is one of my best friends, to this day, and I would not have met him otherwise, without that experience. But through that, obviously, I stopped playing baseball when I was in college, and when the group broke up, I was sort of left wondering, well, what do I do now? And so I got hired at a radio station here in LA called Kiss FM. And I started at the bottom in promotions. And, through that experience, I realized that I really loved entertainment. Specifically, I really loved being on the microphone and getting to hype up crowds. And then I parlayed that into getting hired by American Idol. And I went on tour with season 5 of American Idol. I went to all the audition cities, and I sort of became this online Ryan Seacrest, as it were, for this spinoff of Idol called American Idol Underground. And I did that. And then when that didn't really pan out, that company didn't take off in the way that I think everyone hoped that it would. I realized that I'd gained all this experience, producing content, because I was booking all of these guests. And so I got a call back in 2009 from my cousin who was working on the show Biggest Loser at that time. And he said, "Hey, I think you would be a great fit to be a producer. We need an associate producer. Are you interested?" And I said, "Yeah." And that was where my producing career started back in, I want to say, February of 2009. And I've just been so incredibly fortunate to work on shows like Biggest Loser. And then through that, I got to work on MasterChef, and I helped launch that show here in the States. And then I did Storage Wars, and most recently Extreme Makeover Home Edition, and the reboot of Biggest Loser, and then Deal or No Deal, which we shot down in Orlando. So I've really been fortunate in my career to work on some great shows that people love talking about. And 3 years ago, my life really shifted in a dramatic way when my wife was pregnant with our daughter Emerson. And for me, I think when we found out that news that our daughter was going to be born with an upper limb difference, I just wanted to do whatever I could as a storyteller, as a dad, to use my skills to put something out into the world that would hopefully contribute to a world that's more inclusive and educated and empowering when it comes to disability. And that's how the Capables was born, and it's become my passion project. There's not a day that goes by that I'm not doing something related to the Capables, and I'm so excited to chat with you more about that today.
Yeah, wow, that's a wonderful story. So, just to retract a little bit, so I've been doing a little research on you. I didn't know you were a singer. I didn't find that out in my research. So, that's
Yeah, I
news.
buried that deep on the internet.
So, you found out at 20 weeks, right? When your wife was 20 weeks pregnant, the news about your daughter. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was the 20-week ultrasound, I think. So it was she was about 21 weeks at that point in time.
Okay, so take us back to that moment. Like, what was that experience like? Just take us through that journey when you found this information out.
Yeah, it was shocking right out of the gate because my wife had just gone in for an ultrasound, her normal ultrasound. I don't know if normal is the word I should use. I don't know. Your ultrasound that you go in
Yeah.
for, 20, 22 weeks. And what was really interesting for me, and I'm sure there's other parents out there who have gone through this, and maybe you've gone through it as well, Terrellon, is that before having a child, before my wife got pregnant, I think I was really naive in the sense of what an ultrasound meant. I think growing up, when, my aunts or uncles would be pregnant or, a cousin would be pregnant, I would think, oh, and they'd go have an ultrasound. I'd be like, oh, you got pictures of your kid. Like that's sort of what I associated with ultrasounds, but I didn't realize how much hangs in the balance and how much weight sort of exists in these ultrasounds that you go in for. A lot of the time everything's perfectly fine.
Mm-hmm.
But in our case, we went in. My wife had her ultrasound, and our daughter Emerson during that ultrasound, she wasn't really cooperating because she was breech pretty much for half of the pregnancy. Like she just was stuck, and there was imagery that they couldn't get. And so the tech had said to us, hey, you're going to get a call from radiology in a couple of days because I just can't get some of the pictures of the heart and some of the other stuff that I need. So you're going to have to reschedule this and come back. And so my wife got a call a couple of days later, but it wasn't from radiology. It was from a genetic counselor. And that person, and I wasn't on that call because they called my wife directly, and, she obviously called me after the fact. And they basically said to her, there's some concerns that have come up over what we are and what we are not seeing on the imagery. So we need to schedule an ultrasound with a perinatologist, with a specialist. And we were supposed to leave town. We were going on our, quote unquote, baby moon. We were going to Hawaii on, I think, that Saturday or Sunday. And this was on a Thursday. And so, we told them, we said, look, like we're about to leave town for 7 to 10 days. If this is something important, we really need to get in as soon as possible. So fortunately, they were able to slot us in the next day. And we were there, with the specialist for about 2.5 hours. And it was, these images will always be so vivid in my mind of sitting there in the exam room as they were doing the ultrasound. And, because I'm just such a curious person, and I want answers all the time. And, the specialist had told us that it's really her style not to talk when she's doing these ultrasounds. So, you're sitting in this room with this screen, up on the wall, and you feel like the most important moment of your life is happening right in front of your eyes, and you have no idea what's happening. You're just seeing all these pictures of your kid, and they're typing all these notes into the computer and drawing arrows here and there. And, I'm furiously typing on Google, trying to figure out what these, codes are that the doctor is putting into the machine with the imagery, and not getting any answers at all. And then, she reached the end, and she turns on the lights and she says, okay, let's talk. And that's, it was like immediately I knew that whatever they were concerned about, that it had been confirmed during that ultrasound. And, she basically said to us, so one of the bones in your daughter's right forearm is fully formed. However, we can't find the second bone. And really, until she was born, they didn't know which bone had formed and which one hadn't. They couldn't tell us if she was going to have any digits, and if so, how many, and functionality. And a lot of times when there's limb differences, there are also syndromatic issues that can present as well. And they just, and it's soft tissue stuff most of the time. And they just can't see that on ultrasound. So, what I always say about that experience to sort of tie a bow on it is I just remember seeing, because when she turned on the lights, the screen was still on and there was still a picture, I think, freezed of our daughter up on the screen. And I just remember thinking, that's my daughter. Like she just became, and I'll probably get choked up talking about it. Like
Oh, yeah.
she became so real to me in that moment. And I think for parents out there, you sort of have that moment where your child becomes real. Sometimes it's hearing the heartbeat for the first time. Sometimes it's the first time you hear them cry after they're born. And it's every parent's journey, when that moment happens. And for me, that was it. And I just remember thinking like, okay, this story that we had written for her life, because they sent us to see a counselor afterwards to sort of just talk about the news and how we were feeling. And I just remember thinking, because the counselor had said to us, your sadness right now is your own. It's not your child's. She will never know her life any different. And where that really resonated for me was I just started having this thought of, for me as a writer, for me as a storyteller, I had written a story that was never going to be. I wrote the story of my daughter's life before she was even born, and that was a mistake that I made.
Mm.
And it really slowed me down. And I realized in that moment that like her story was starting to be written and she was going to write that story, not me. And it really shifted my perspective on a lot of things in life. And obviously it really moved me and compelled me in a lot of ways. And that next day, that's when the idea of the capables came to me.
Wow. So the very next day is when you
Yeah.
had this idea. Wow.
Yeah. I was getting ready for work. And I was getting out of the shower and I kept thinking, I want to do something. I want to do something. I want to do something. Help. Like, I don't know who I was talking to, but I was just like, help me find an outlet for this energy that I have, for this pull that I'm feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like the title, The Capables, came to me. It wasn't like the idea of what it was first. And then I was like, oh, I got to come up with a name for what I'm going to call these kids. But it was like The Capables, because I kept thinking that I wanted my daughter to know that she is capable. She's capable of doing anything that she wants to do in her life. And so this idea of this group of kids superheroes came to me, and they're called the Capables. And they all have a difference or disability, and they're super capable kids superheroes, and their powers are activated through empowerment.
Yeah.
And that was it. And it's taken a long time. I'm not a very patient person, so it's been really hard
Yeah.
to sort of slow down and be patient through this process. But I really believe that it all happened exactly as it needed to for us to be where we are today, with not just this first book, but for our big dreams of making this into a series that represents as many disabilities and differences as authentically as we possibly can.
Right. And then just going back to that moment when you got this news, you saw that picture, that image of your daughter. Do you still have that image, by the way?
Yeah,
Oh,
we saved. I come from a family that likes to save things, aka pack rats.
okay. That's a
So
TV show, right?
yeah, I did not work on that one. That was
okay.
not a show that I produced, but
Yeah.
I'm producing it in my own life.
Right.
Um, I yeah, we saved all of our ultrasound images. So yeah, we still have that. And actually, some of the early X-rays that we even got after Emerson was born, of her arm. And I'm sure we can get into talking about this in greater detail. But one of those pictures of her right forearm and hand was an image that I provided to our illustrator, that she directly sort of sourced one of these moments in our book where Ray and her parents are meeting with a doctor, and
Oh,
that
yeah.
image
I
that the
remember
doctor is,
that.
yeah, so that image was directly pulled from the picture of Emerson's arm.
Oh, that's amazing. So, in that moment, did the doctors tell you your daughter would have a disability, or what was your thinking as far as like disability and your daughter and associating her with the disability? Did that even come to your mind in that moment?
That I'm so glad you asked that question, because that's something, frankly, I didn't really start um, working on within myself, and how I sort of used the word disability and my daughter until about I would say a year ago. I mean, I knew that my daughter was born with a disability, but I don't think I ever referred to her as a child living with a disability. And to be totally honest with you, I don't know why. I don't know why that was, and that's something that I'm still sort of on that personal journey with myself. I mean, they didn't refer to my daughter as like a child with a disability. It just, they said she has a congenital upper limb difference and then gave her a diagnosis, but the word disability never came up. And maybe that's where the foundation for language for me in, throughout the pregnancy and even the early years of her life was always sort of deferring to, limb difference and, upper limb difference, congenital limb difference, syndactyly, all these more sort of like medical terms. And it wasn't until I really started engaging with, befriending individuals who identify as people living with disabilities that word specifically started becoming a part of language that I use. And I haven't really thought about this personally, but I know that there's a lot of fear in society around language, and a lot of people want to make sure they use the right language. And I think a lot of people think that the word disabled or disability is a bad word, and it's not. It is. One of our board members, Nicole Kelly, who's become a dear friend of mine and really has helped shape so much of what our first book, Ray's First Day, has become. It was during one of our conversations that she said to me, she said, disability is not a bad word. It is actually the most accurate word that you can use to, to describe one part of who we are. And I think through that conversation, it really opened up the door for me to, one, use that word, but also to think about my child as a disabled, a person living with a disability, a child with a disability. And I think once I sort of recognized that and own that within our family unit, maybe some subconscious fear that I'd never thought about relating to that really started to wash away. But again, like, that's a journey that I think we're all on, not just individually, whether you're a parent of a child with a disability or someone from the disability community. Is language is something that is so relevant and so talked about right now, is that it's constantly changing. And that's where I feel like we really have to have those conversations with individuals with that lived experience to constantly make sure that we understand what language is preferred by them, but also understanding that just because it's preferred by them, it doesn't mean that the next person you encounter with a disability or whatever difference you're discussing, that's their preferred language. And I think that's the work that we have to do. And that's one thing that we're committed to with the Capables.
Yeah. And I think that's great that you mentioned that, because I'll just give an example. Let's say your daughter, and I think you may have said this maybe in an interview, I think. I think your daughter was at the playground and there was a child who was staring. And I think maybe the mom was like, don't stare. And then I think the mom may have said something like, no, she's not different. But then I don't know if you educated her in that moment. You said, yes, she is different. She has a disability. She is different, and that's okay. Like, I don't know if that was your story or if I made that up.
No, you're touching on a lot of things that did happen. It was an encounter that my daughter and I had with the park not far from our house where we live. And I think this was something that probably would have happened earlier in her life, had we not been living through a pandemic where there's not so many, where people aren't really going to the park and kids just aren't playing with each other as much as they historically have. And so it was something that I think I knew was going to happen at some point in our life. I just didn't know when, and it probably would have happened sooner, frankly, had we not been living through these times. But we were at the park, and these two little girls ran over with their mom because they saw our dog and they wanted to play with our dog. And then they saw Emerson, my daughter. And the older sister, pointed at her arm and said, her hand is really small. And I said, yeah, that's the way she was born. And she said, well, that's weird. And I was like, okay, here we go. Teaching moment. So, for me, like, before I got into television, I worked a lot with kids growing up. I was a camp counselor. I was, an after school, like club director, and helped build a children's activity center with mommy and me classes. So I've worked a lot around kids. I have 4 younger siblings. And so I've learned how to dialogue with kids. So, I immediately got down, on this little girl's level. And I just said, well, it's actually not weird. Our differences are what give us our superpowers in life. And, in the case of Emerson, yes, her hand and her arm do look different, but differences come in so many different forms in our world. Like you have blonde hair, but your sister has brown hair. That's not weird. That's just one thing that makes you different. Um, and I think that's something that, it's so interesting because it really felt like a full circle moment for me, because a lot of that language that I don't know if I would have had, and I don't even know to this day if I handled the situation perfectly, but I had the conversation,
Yeah.
and I think that's what's vital. And I'll give the mom credit who was there, is that she didn't, you know, immediately try to jump in and tell me not to talk to her children or whatever it was. She participated in the conversation actively with us, and that's something that I would encourage other parents to do out there. If you and or your child encounter, a child with a disability or an adult with a disability, a visible one, is not to point, not to stare, but if you have questions, just engage in conversation. And I say that with the caveat that not every person, not every family is in a position where they want to have the conversation at that moment, and you have to respect that as well. But at least engaging and having a conversation goes a lot further than, telling your child, don't stare, don't point. Because I think when those conversations happen, when that language is used, you're reinforcing in some way in that child's mind that, oh, that is weird. Oh, that is something that I should be scared of. My mommy or daddy don't even know how to talk about this with me. So, and it reinforces this story that they have in their mind that it is something to be scared of. It is something that's different, and different isn't super. Different is something that's weird. And I think we need to shift that. And that's, where, you look at the capables, and what, our slogan is that different is super. And that applies to everybody. That's not just children with disabilities or, various, minority groups. That's anyone in life. Is that I think so often we try to like fit into this mold of what we think the world wants us to be, or what we think we need to be to succeed, or whatever it might be. And we lose our magic in that. We lose our superpowers when we do that. And that's where, we want to empower people to live their most authentic life, no matter what that looks like, no matter how that presents, in the world.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. So just going back to, because there may be some parents listening who want to make sure they're having the right conversations with their children. Let's say there's another park incident, for
Mm,
example, and a mom or dad is like, "Don't stare," and they just walk away. There's no education. It's just don't stare. Okay, let's leave.
mm.
What would be a better approach, just so that we're making sure the child is being educated in that moment? And I know this is a big question, because there's
Yeah.
probably many ways to answer it, but could you see, just you being a dad of someone with a disability, how you would want it to go?
Yeah, I think, and this is so personal, so
Yeah.
I don't want to speak for every parent out there who has a child with a disability, whether it's visible or non-visible. But for me personally, most of the time, as long as I'm not having a bad day, or I'm not rushing off to, try to get my kid in the car because she's crying and hungry or whatever, is, if your child is interested, and you don't necessarily need to like seek us out, run all the way across the park to ask us the
Right.
question. But
Yeah.
if we're playing on the playground together, the kids are sitting on the swings, you know, we're adults, and you know if your child is noticing, if your child has asked you a question. So
Right.
just ask me, just say, hey, you know, my kid, was asking about, your child's hand. Is that a conversation that we can have? Are we okay to have that conversation? And then just let the parent guide you from there. The reality is that most parents, at least the ones that I've encountered, of children with disabilities, they they want to educate. They feel, you know, that is their child. That is their life. And we want this world to be more inclusive. We want disability to be normalized. And the only way that that happens is if we talk about it. If we keep running away from it, if we keep not showing it on television or in children's books or movies or whatever it might be, then it's not going to be normalized. And furthermore, if the stories are all about the child's disability, and it's not about just like the normal thing that the kid does, or the normal thing that the adult does, that every other adult or every other child does in their life, then we reinforce this negative narrative about, like, the individuals with disabilities doing normal things is something to be celebrated. No, we just need to represent them in an authentic way, just like everybody else lives a normal life, just like everybody else has good days and bad days and likes to go on the swings or doesn't like to go on the slide. Like, it's just about seeing things that are different. And what I've realized is that with kids is that, kids will move on. If you give them an honest answer, they'll be like, okay, now I have the answer, let's just move on. But when you sort of like tiptoe around things and you try to soften it, and I was even guilty of this before Emerson, was born, and I really did the work to educate myself, or started doing the work to educate myself, because I'm still learning. There was language that I used early days where I would say differently abled, and that's language that is really not preferred by many people in the disability community, or people say handy-capable, and those are not words, those aren't terms that came from the disability community. More often not than not, they're from the non-disabled community, where it's people who are afraid to say the word disabled or disability, and they come up with some new term to try to soften it.
Hmm.
And so I bring all that up to say, like, I'm all for having the conversation, but that's just me personally. And I think as much as you can do as a parent, if you want to have those conversations, because we do this in the book where, there's 38 pages in our book, and 36 of them really don't have anything to do or talk about Emerson, or Emerson, excuse me. Her name is Ray, who was obviously,
It's based on her.
yeah, it was based on Emerson. That's the first time I've ever done that. So, Ray has this upper limb difference, but we don't really talk about it very much. There's 2 pages in the middle of the book where we address it. And I did that specifically because I knew that some kids were going to notice it, and they were going to ask their parents. And there might be some parents who wouldn't know how to have that conversation, want to, but don't know how. So I wanted to give them the moment to have that conversation by just reading the text in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And I think once you address it, then the kid goes, oh, I get it now. Okay, there's an image. You just told me she was born with one bone in her forearm. Okay, now moving on. She's a kid like me. She goes to school. She has fun. She plays in the playground. She colors. We have so much more in common than I might have thought. Like, the kids just move on, but it's when we, sort of like avoid it, and we try to pick and choose how to say it and how to address it. The kids are so intuitive. Kids are so smart. And they're like, oh, even my mommy doesn't know how to talk about this, and you're
Right.
laying that foundation so early, which is why it's so vital to, one, have the conversations out in the real world when the family is open to having it, the family where disabilities is intersecting their lives, but also that there be more authentic representation, and we normalize disability more in books, in children's television shows, in YouTube videos, whatever it is. The more we see it, the more normal it is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's starting to happen, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And I am on the front lines, proudly banging my drum, making as much noise as I can to ensure that that happens, not just for my daughter, but for every kid, like her, and every kid in the future.
Right. And this is a good segue into your book, because I loved reading Ray's First Day. I
Oh,
mean, I also love the illustration, the imagery, everything. It was just so beautiful.
thank
And there
you.
were 3 main messages that I got from it. And then you can tell us, what your premise was in writing the book, or the premise of the book. So the 3 messages I got, the ones that were glaring, were overcoming challenges, facing your fears, and encouraging confidence. And I saw that
Mm.
through the affirmations, which I love, because my husband used to do that with my kids when they were in elementary. So I love
Oh.
that you put that in there. I thought that was so great. So when you were writing the book, what was the premise for you? Like, what messages did you want others to get out of this book?
Yeah, I think exactly, what you touched on is a lot of what I was thinking going into it. When I first started writing the book, yes, I've worked in television for many years, and I do a lot of writing, but I had never written a children's book before. So I'd never written a book before in my life. So this whole thing was sort of uncharted waters. And what does story structure look like, and what does language look like as it pertains not just to children's books, but as we're, talking about disability, and what is the story that I want to tell, and what is Ray's superpower, and how does it manifest? And a lot of that, to be totally honest with you, when I first started writing the book, there were a lot of days, because I knew what the story was. I knew what the beginning, the middle, and the end was. And then you sit down in front of the screen and you go, oh, geez, now I got to write it.
Mm-hmm.
Now I have to make it interesting. Now I have to make it entertaining. Now I need to give these characters personality and make them believable. And that is a massive undertaking, and it has given me so much appreciation and respect for authors, no matter what kind of story you write, but then the authors who are able to do it book after book after book, whether that be, in the adult genre, like someone like John Grisham, who just writes these incredibly engaging books with these characters with all these layers, down into, children's books. Like we love the Questionnaire series with Ada Twist and Rosie Revere. And, obviously J.K. Rowling did a fantastic job of that with the Harry Potter series. And it's such a journey. And, there were so many challenges for me. And it's interesting that you bring up like overcoming challenges, because I think in a lot of ways, it was obviously a book that I wrote for kids, but I also wanted to write it for their parents. And I think that's where the influence of, like what Pixar does so well is they produce these films that are entertaining and engaging for kids, but they have a story that moves and connects with parents. It's this shared journey that you sort of go on with your children, and it keeps both audiences, young and old, entertained. And that was something that I wanted to do with our book. And so I started looking at what like Pixar did so well, and ways that they made characters interesting for kids, but also a text that would connect with parents.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you talk about overcoming challenges, facing fears, confidence, that is something that is very relevant to kids. And especially, in the story of our first book, where it's Ray's first day of school, that's a huge challenge. That's a huge fear for a child, whether they have a disability or not. And so I think it was finding those things that all kids could relate to, and even parents could relate to, is like remembering their first time going to kindergarten or junior high or high school, or their first day of work at a new job. Like that's something that we can all relate to. And it's something that I wanted to address in our book. And you're right. And we did that. But like, even as the text sort of evolved and we formed our board, a lot of those opportunities to cover those topics, there were drafts of the book where we didn't do that as much as we did in the final draft. But then one of our board members, who's a social emotional learning educator, she started presenting all these like thoughts around like, well, what if in this moment we can address like decision making, and self-confidence, and all these sorts of things, where our text really started to grow and evolve and expand. And that's why I always say, when it comes to the Capables, that I don't consider myself to be the creator. I'm the one that the idea sort of came to, but I think of myself more as a conduit. And that's where people like Nicole Kelly and Jason Schneider and Kizzy and Ryan Haddad and Mika Jane, who are our board members, they helped to take this sort of like sandbox that I had built. And then we got into the sandbox and started playing together and figuring out what it looked like. And with all of their lived experience, with all their expertise, we then made a book that wasn't just entertaining, that wasn't just something where, a child with a disability could see themselves represented as a hero. It presented all these different opportunities for learning, for confidence boosting, for empowerment. And I couldn't have done it without them. But, long story short, because I know I just went off on this huge long tangent. You're right. Those were things that I wanted to address within the book. And, and we sort of color it all up with these beautiful illustrations that basically look like a comic book or graphic novel for kids.
Yeah. And I mean, I could definitely tell that you're a writer, you're a producer. Like even with some of the plants in the book, I won't give anything away, but I love that I love that developing relationship between Ray and Lex. So
Yes.
I'm looking forward to seeing that. And
Oh yeah,
I can definitely see this being a television series. Just
oh
throwing
my
that out
gosh.
there.
That wasn't something I thought about when I first started writing the book. This is my goal from day one, was just to write, illustrate, and print one book where Emmy and I could just sit together and read a book where the hero looked like her. That was the goal. And then it started finding its way into the world, and then we did our Kickstarter campaign in September of last year, and we became fully funded in 3 days, and hundreds of people from legitimately all corners of the world found us and started supporting us. And the vast majority of those people I'd never met before in my life. And then you start thinking, oh my gosh, is this something that could be bigger or more than just this one book, more than just a book series. And we've met with Nickelodeon, we met with Netflix, and nothing is landed yet. A lot of it was just sort of not right now.
Mm-hmm.
But frankly speaking, and I can say this now, 6 months after all of the no's that we got, is I'm so glad that that's the way it happened. Because if we had gotten a deal with Nickelodeon or Netflix or some of these other massive animation studios that we started chatting with, I don't think that I was in the right state of mind yet to take this really important, this really potentially powerful and impactful entity and properly lead it forward in that medium. I don't think I was ready yet.
Mm.
Um, and maybe I'll never be ready. And I'm okay with that. I'm more okay with that now than I've ever been, because I lost when all of those, I'm gonna get choked up again, but when all of those big, glitzy, glamorous opportunities started coming our way, um, I lost sight of why I did this in the beginning.
Mm.
And I never thought that would happen, but it did. And I'll admit that it happened. And that's what lets me know that it wasn't the right time. And I'm so glad that it happened, because it helped me to refocus on my daughter and on this journey and the why behind why we're doing this. And at the end of the day, I can't control what a network executive thinks is viable or not. I can't even control what my agents think is viable or not. And it's disheartening, but it also has ignited this fire in me to be like, you know what? You don't see it. And that's totally fine, because I don't need you to see it, because I do. And even if I'm only ever the person that sees it, that's enough, because it'll keep me working. And the one thing that I can control is the books. We self-publish them. I'm not beholden to anybody. Nobody has cut me a check, and I don't have to deliver a book by this day. I don't have to make a character look like that. I don't have to make their story look like that. I can bring in whatever individuals I feel make the most sense for our mission with the Capables to write and illustrate and deliver the best stories we possibly can. And I can control that. And I'd lost sight of that. I got really, frankly, depressed after we got shot down by Nickelodeon and Netflix and a bunch of other individuals. And I thought I failed. I thought that I had let my daughter down. And I thought that the promise that I made her, I didn't deliver. But then when I took her to school, I'm sorry, on her first day of preschool back in August, and I saw in her classroom our book on the shelf in there,
Mm.
I knew that we had succeeded. And it refocused me, and it recentered me, and it reminded me of why we're doing it and what I have control over. And so that's why we're now working on book number 2, and we're committed to doing everything we can to share the story about Ray's first day and the Capables, to ensure that more people find out about this. And as I've said, anyone who will listen, I will talk about this with anyone,
Yeah.
because I believe in it and I love it. And I think the world, it wants to be in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I admire everything that you've done for your daughter, even this just self-publishing, you even having an advisory board, because that's not, I don't usually hear writers saying that they've done
Mm.
that for their book. So I just thought that was amazing that you were just willing to put in all that work and effort because you wanted to make sure your daughter was represented properly. Even
Yeah.
having it in her school, like I'm thinking, okay, it should be at all preschools. You know what I mean? That might be something that, would spark an idea for you. I don't know. I like to throw out ideas too. But
I mean, if you're a preschool, if you run a preschool, or you're a preschool teacher, or you're a kindergarten teacher or a first grade teacher, or
yes.
you work for a district, uh, call me.
Yeah. And
I
get
would
your
love
book
nothing
too.
more. Yeah, please, please. I mean, we're at this point where because when we launched the book, there was a lot of people who started taking notice of us. We we did some really great press. We were on, the local Fox affiliate here in LA. Entrepreneur covered us. All these good news pages on Instagram started running our story based off of this post that my sister put up on Reddit. And we started getting like all these new followers, and celebrities started following us. And I was like, oh my gosh, what if so-and-so celebrity posts about our book? I don't have enough books to sell. Like I had only ordered 500 books, after we did our Kickstarter campaign, because I didn't want to have thousands of books just sitting in my garage. But then all these people started talking about us. So I did order thousands of books. And then the buzz started, sort of quieting down. And I would come out to my garage every day and just see these boxes of books sitting here. And I was, it was around that time that we were getting all these no's from, the Nickelodeons of the world and whatnot. And so one day it hit me. I was like, you know what means more to me with this book, what impacts me more is not when I get an Amazon alert that we sold a book, or when I get a ping from our website that somebody ordered a book and I have to go out to the garage and pack it and send it. It's when we get DMs. It's when we get comments. It's when people email us. It's when people post a review on Amazon and they tell us what the book has meant to them, and more importantly, to their child. So I started seeking out ways that I could just get the book out into the world, not even selling it. I've donated hundreds of copies of this book. I've sent out hundreds of copies to little free libraries all around North America, just because I just want this story to be out in the world. Now, is that a model that works long term? No, but I say that to bring up, like, if you are a preschool out there, if you are a first grade teacher or a second grade teacher or a kindergarten teacher, whatever you are, you're a superintendent, you just ordering one book from us. Imagine if every superintendent in the US ordered one book from us.
Mm-hmm.
What would that look like? Or go to Amazon if you prefer to order there. I don't care where you get it. Just do it. Like it would make a massive difference, obviously, for us and what we're looking to do, because every book that I sell ensures that I can do more books, right?
Right.
Like without selling books, I mean, it is a business at the end of the day. And if I don't sell books, it's really hard for me to print more books. But it also has a very real impact. The reviews that we have received from parents, I would cry if I read them all to you. But I say it just to bring up, like, people enjoy this story and it is impacting people's lives. So if you're one of those people who's in a position to bring it into a school or whatever, please do so. And I'm happy to work with you to figure out how we make that happen.
Perfect. Well said. I'm going to leave a positive review on Amazon as well, because I love the book so much. Well, thank you so much, Danny, for being here. Now, where can people find you if they want to know about you, or where to buy the book, and just the Capables in general?
Yeah, of course. So if people, want to buy the book, you can do that on our website, which is thecapables.com. Or if you're an Amazon person, or you happen to live internationally and it's cheaper to order it and get the shipping, you can buy our paperback and our hardback on Amazon. We also have a coloring book and an activity book that you can buy there. And if you're a social media person, you can follow us on all social media channels at The Capables. We love connecting with people there. We share a lot of fun content. So please come find us there.
Thanks for listening to Time Out with Tinseltown Mom. If you liked what you heard today, please be so kind and rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes, because when you do that, you get this podcast in front of more listeners. And I want to offer more encouragement to a wider audience. So any positive reviews that you can give would be so helpful. Until next time. Hi everyone, I'm Tara Lon. Welcome to Time Out with Tinseltown Mom. I'm here today with Danny Jordan, a television producer and director who's worked on a myriad of shows such as Extreme Makeover Home Edition, Biggest Loser, MasterChef, Deal or No Deal, plus many more. After his daughter was diagnosed with an upper limb difference, he authored The Capables, a book series that puts children like his daughter in the hero role to encourage readers to be more inclusive and understanding when it comes to disabilities. Ray's First Day is the debut book in the series, and it was released earlier this year. Today, Danny's going to talk about his family's journey while encouraging other parents, whether disability affects their lives or not. Hi, Danny. Welcome.
Hey, Terrellon, thank you so much for having me. It's great to meet you.
Well, it's great to meet you as well. And I know I just gave a little snippet of your bio, but there's so many facets about you. You've done so much. Can you
Oh
just
my
tell
gosh.
us a little bit more about you and your family dynamic?
Yeah, of course, I'd be glad to. So, I'm born and raised here in Southern California, which I know I'm sort of a rare breed, when it comes to people who work in and around the entertainment industry. I was born, like I said, here and grew up. I left for a little while. I went out to New York for a couple of years and worked out there for a little while, but found my way back here to California. I always tell people that California is where my heart is, but New York is where my soul is,
Mm.
but sort of in this chapter of my life, with being a dad and a husband and, my parents live 7 minutes away, I'm sort of following that heart end of who I am, as it were. But yeah, I grew up around the entertainment industry. I played baseball growing up. Like that was my love in life. That's what I wanted to do for my career. But then, when I was late teens, 18, 19 years old, I auditioned for this show called Pop Stars, which was on the WB.